I'd like to start with Vicente, and one of the things that I think would be wonderful is to just ask you the question, when did you first encounter Bruce's work?
Okay. So first I would like to start with a scene from a movie. It's a movie by Woody Allen, I forgot which, where Woody Allen is on the line together with Diane Keaton to watch a movie, and they are discussing Marshall McLuhan, the society of mass media, something like that. And then a man who's in the line comes and says, "You got it all wrong." He says, "How come? Who are you?" "I'm Marshall McLuhan." So I hope we have the same situation here, so, okay. I was born in a 500-inhabitant village during Franco's dictatorship in Spain. Art didn't exist, of course, because most of the artists were opposite to Franco. There was censorship. So I took shelter in literature, because that was easier to get. And you could even get some uncensored books. When I went to high school, I was lucky that I had a great art history professor. So then art became also part of my life, but only in slides. Once they took us to Valencia, to the Museum of Fine Arts, but you only saw things until 19th century. But then, I went to college in 1975, and Franco died. So it was big liberation. And in 1976, I was working as a guide in some caves in Sama to make some money. And I read that there was this exhibition focusing on Spain during the Republic and Franco's times. And I said, oh, I want to see that. At that time, I was interested in archaeology and Renaissance and Mannerism, no modern art. I didn't know it. So after 36 hours of the train ride, I arrived in Venice. I go to the youth hostel, and they tell me, oh, fully booked. Come tomorrow. And I said, where can I sleep? Says, some people live in the Giardini di Castello, which is where the Biennale was. I went there with my backpack and a sleeping bag. I slept there. And the next morning, when I woke up, I went directly into the Venice Biennale, and I had an epiphany. And I said, I don't know what is this, but that's what I want to do in life. And it was 76, and there were two artists that really blew my mind. I didn't understand anything, but they took me into another level, you know? Like in Stanley Kubrick, with the humanoid throws the stone into the sky, yep. And it becomes a spaceship. So we had the yellow room, which we also showed, and this another picture. And at the same time, we had next the Duchamp's door. No? That only later is when I kind of made a relationship with both works. This I thought I saw in 76, although doing research, it appears in 78. But in 76 there was a Duchamp work, but we couldn't find which work it is. Memory sometimes fails. But somehow I put together that, and then the year after, then for me the only way to have access to modern art was to go every 2 years to the Venice Biennale. And because in Spain at the moment, even modern art didn't exist. The spirit of Franco was still alive. So I kept going every year. Then in 78, next. That's to say Duchamp. Then Duchamp, I realized, okay, Duchamp is doing the artwork from the epiphany of daily life in his where he lives. No? He did this. This was a zinc stopper. He had a problem in Cadaqués, this village in the coast of Spain, and where it was irregular, so he couldn't stop the water. So he had this idea to do this version in bronze, cast it, and then he did an edition like numismatic in silver and in gold and platinum. And next, and the last work he did before he died, 2 years before, was this chimney that he called the inn in Cadaqués. No? Next.
And that's a picture of Richard Hamilton.
Yes, exactly, because they couldn't find it, and Richard, who went to live in Cadaqués because of Duchamp, finally they found it. It was called the anaglyph chimney. Okay, next. Yeah. And in 1978, there was the performance corridor together with, next, the, that was already in 1980. This really impressed me. That were really, when I went in, suddenly, I didn't even ask what it meant, but it hit me. It hit me in the body, you know? So it was a kind of mental and physical experience, no? And essentially, I'm interested in something which I think I can more or less grasp, but I cannot explain, no? And that was, there was this when you entered, you had this camera that would make a recording of you, but the more you went in there, the closer, the smaller you became. It was a double monitor. Next. And then you had also this perfect odor, perfect door. Also, the use of pans, which was also something that Marcel Duchamp also was doing. I don't think Bruce knew Marcel Duchamp at that time, but probably kind of the spirit through John Cage, who was a follower, no, was in the air. But I think they were kind of parallel roads, no. Next. Then, in order to become an art historian and a museum curator, I came to the US in 1980. I was here 4 years as a Fulbright scholar. And this is what I did. I really did my research. And then in 1995, I was asked to come to Valencia to start a new museum, IVAM. And this was the main acquisition I made, the model for tunnels, which it was the biggest acquisition we have ever made. And I said no, but I thought it was really an essential piece for the collection. And at the same time, we had also the prints for the holograms. Next. Then in 1996, I left IVAM to become the founding director of the Serralves Museum of Contemporary Art. And there, the opening exhibition was called Circa 1968. And it was a proposal for the collection and for the program of the museum. Why 1968? Because I thought there were, in the 20th century, there were two changes of paradigm. The first, after the First World War, in 1917, with the Dada, constructivism, and the style. And the second, around 68. In the first change of paradigm, I thought, yeah, Duchamp was a change of paradigm inside the change of paradigm. But in this exhibition, we had Bruce's work. We had also the drawing for Bruce, and we had next. We had also the steel channel piece next, and con escojones, the performance element with the text. And in this exhibition, Circa 68, I thought Bruce occupied the same position that Duchamp occupied in the first change of paradigm. No?
Great.
And so we managed to acquire a version of in Brazilian of the artist, the neon piece, but and next. And then we only met when I arrived at Tate Modern in 2003, and we had this turbine hall projects, turbine hall commissions. So the first one, when I was there, Juan made one, but I arrived afterwards, Juan Muñoz. And Olafur Eliasson made a very popular one, which was the weather project, which people call the sun. It was so popular because it was a misunderstanding, really. It was supposed to be physical, but people took it like a kind of tramway, right. You know. But it became the summer beach of London. And some people came with a canoe rowing, others were there with a picnic, Santa Claus dancing, I mean, all kinds of stuff. So I said, now we are in a very dangerous position. Now people will want us to repeat the same, you know. Like the Song by the Kings, we give the people what they want. I said, no. We have to get the ball back into the pitch. Right. And then he said, who can do that? Bruce Nauman. We need somebody that will slap really interpret in the face to our audience, so that we get back to the pitch and play inside, broadening the pitch and not going outside the pitch to satisfy the primary instincts of the public. No?
Bravo.
Yeah. So, and this work is the one that we showed in the exhibition in Milano, but outdoors.
Right.
So,
Great. Thank you. Taylor, you're next. What was
Thank you.
what was the spark that really brought you into Bruce's world? And you've really spent considerable time thinking and writing, and with the major show at MoMA and the show logger, that's a big investment.
Well, first, I just wanted to thank you, Louis, and your team for having me here. I can't imagine a better context for my first trip to Santa Fe, and it's such a pleasure to be in conversation with both of you and in this audience of dignitaries. But I guess truly the first exposure, the primal scene with Nauman, there were two, and both were in college when I had moved from the Midwest, where I grew up, like Bruce did, to New York and was finding art. And one was in the museum, one was in the classroom, but they both kind of dealt with expectations around what an artist is supposed to be, and that was very formative for me. So the museum exposure would have been at Dia Beacon, a little bit upstate, that kind of mecca of minimalism, where they would leave installations up for years and years so you could make these repeat pilgrimages from the city, which I did a lot. And that was where I first saw Mapping the Studio, which I'm sure people are familiar with, this 2002 kind of momentous piece, really, that I think shifted the course a bit. But this sort of set of life-size projections in a room of the studio space where you could just go and sit and be kind of immersed in it for this long duration video that was showing nothing but these kind of static shots of the empty studio, infrared cameras running all night long when, the man himself, the protagonist, has gone to bed for the night and the studio is empty. And nothing is happening, but everything is happening because the more you pay attention, which is obviously one of the watchwords of the Nauman canon, the more you pay attention, you notice that it's not empty and it's not vacant and it's not idle. The moths are fluttering, the cat is chasing the mice through the studio, right? There's these ambient noises, and you kind of recalibrate your expectations for what an art experience is supposed to be and slow down with it. But I also read shortly after seeing it that Bruce had been compelled to make it after a period of feeling kind of creatively tapped out and like nothing much was coming out of the studio. So maybe this was a solution to try something else. And I just was moved by how kind of magisterial the work was to be with, right? It's kind of this hauntingly beautiful piece despite its simplicity, but then also how sort of humble the seed of it seemed to be around the expectations that we have that an artist goes into the studio and the magic happens, right? And yet what a difficult thing to sustain the pressure of year after year and decade after decade. And my second encounter in school was with a work that had kind of a similar theme. I was in a slide lecture and the professor showed Failing to Levitate in the Artist's Studio. From the mid-60s, just a simple black and white photograph using a double exposure technique, a sort of trick that goes back to the surrealists. But you see Bruce's body in this kind of cluttered studio space where he's balancing between two chairs. And then the second exposure, he's crashed to the ground and fallen off the chairs. And it just seemed like such a remarkable comment on, again, the expectations that we have for what happens in that studio and what it would mean to fail those expectations, even at such an early stage in someone's career, to kind of feel that pressure that something transcendent is supposed to occur, and yet what if it doesn't, or what if something else happens instead, or what if there's a different kind of labor that goes into being an artist? And at a time when I was starting to be an art history major, so I was taking all the surveys and I was just immersed in the canon of, frankly, white male artists that were going after that genius mastery label and embracing it wholeheartedly. It was moving to me to think that there could be another way, and it stuck with me.
So what was the the thinking or what happened in the sense that you obviously made the decision to make Bruce and his work there's a long-term commitment to it, obviously, and that's something I'd love to hear about what has made that happen for you. Yeah, you.
Okay. Yes. So I finished college. I became an art history major, despite how my parents felt about the prospects of such a thing. I got into Harvard, which made them feel a little better about the prospects of such a thing, and went to graduate school and was sort of casting about for a dissertation topic, as you're forced to do only a few years in. And what were my criteria? I was trying to think about to find an artist that felt inexhaustible. And I felt like Bruce was that. That just practically speaking, a dissertation takes 7 years if you go the straight and narrow path, and I did not. It took longer. So you're with this other person's life's work for such a long period of time in your own young life, and you have to find someone whose career can sustain that level of interest and scrutiny, frankly, without everybody kind of losing the thread. And as a historian looking at the 1960s in particular, I felt like when I tried to wrap my mind around what Bruce had achieved in that decade, it ran parallel to and through the movements that meant the most to me. Like minimalism made sense, and conceptual art made sense, and art and technology and performance. Everything I cared about, I felt like I could deepen my knowledge of, and I could bring it to bear, and it was relevant, but also that none of those boxes would encapsulate him neatly. None of those things would just be kind of a pre-baked answer. And I'm drawn, I guess, as a scholar of art as opposed to some more concrete subject to that kind of gulf between, is this being annoying? Is this better? Yeah. We'll try it. I'm attracted to that gap between what the most compelling works of art are and are achieving, and what scholarship can say about them, what language can say about them, frankly. And there are artists who make work to be written about, and I think that that's probably a very satisfying experience for the writer to get to feel like, oh, okay, like there's a path, and as long as I go through all the steps and check the boxes and do the work, I will have answered this, and we can like put a pin in that and move on. And I wanted someone whose achievement as a visual artist would just like outpace me forever, and found that in Bruce's work.
Great, thank you. That's great. Vicente, in a way, maybe this is not fair, but the HangarBicocca show to me was kind of a summation of all of the things you've been thinking about for Bruce over the years, and it really felt that way. It wasn't, a traditional retrospective, but it had the weight of history attached to it, and in a focus that was really interesting.
Well, it took me 32 years since my first museum to do the exhibition. And sometimes it's like this. I always say that I do the exhibitions that I would like to see. Yeah. In a way, it's like Juan Rulfo, the great Mexican writer, when they asked him, how come he only wrote one book, Pedro Páramo y El Llano en Llamas, he said, because it was the book missing in my library. So, every museum I have been, there was a presence of Bruce Nauman, but I had to wait for the right moment. And the moment arrived when in 2012, I was asked to become director of Pirelli HangarBicocca. And then the first exhibition that came to my mind, well, first, whenever I go into a new museum, I take as a model Louis Kahn. Louis Kahn, before he started the building, would ask, what do you want to be? Mr. Brick, what do you want to be? Mr. Concrete, what do you want to be? So I asked HangarBicocca, what do you want to be? And I said, the answer was, use the space as it is. The second, it was, there has to be a symbiosis between art and architecture in a way that 1 + 1 = 3. The arts in there will change the space, but the space will also change, will give an opportunity for the art to be seen differently. So I said, at Tate Modern, we are doing commissions. But I said, no, it wouldn't work here. First, I don't like to repeat myself. Second, at Tate, the space, you have this ramp, you have this elevation, is more for one piece. As a matter of fact, there we tried to do once an exhibition with the collection, it was a failure. Artwork didn't live there, they were diminished. I said, no, here is wider. I think here we could do real exhibitions. So we are going to do site-specific retrospectives, unique. You cannot repeat them. And the first artist that came to my mind was Bruce Nauman. But I know we were too young, and nobody knew us, and we didn't have the power, the long power to have the exhibition. So I waited for an opportunity. And the opportunity was when Tate started organizing with Elstedrick the retrospective. I said, okay, can we piggyback? That means let's use a structure, but then in order to do the exhibition I wanted to do, because the exhibition I had in mind at the beginning was rooms and corridors, but not neons. So when I saw the exhibition at Tate, I said, okay, let's take the neons, that makes sense. It even enrich my former concept, but then we just 1/3 of the exhibition, but in order to build a completely different exhibition. So that was, and so it took 10 years, from 2012 to 2022. So, time is like a chewing gum.
Right. Yeah. So what is interesting is, how both of you structured these two exhibitions. And Taylor, can you comment on like how you approached the show that was at the Show Lager and MoMA and PS1? How was that structured, and how did you go about structuring that show?
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to get to be kind of the junior curatorial member on the team of this international group of curators under Kathy Hallreich's leadership that put together this show that spanned the Schaulager in Switzerland and then in New York doing the 6th floor of MoMA as well as the whole of PS1, which is such a privilege to have that much space in such like unique and distinct spaces to really realize the exhibition. And the mandate, I think, was that it needed to be kind of the soup to nuts retrospective. And yet, obviously, there's too much in a 50-year career to do everything. You have to make choices. You have to leave things out. My boss, Kathy Hallreich, had the really brilliant insight, I think, to think about disappearance as a lens, as a way to, an idea that was broad enough and capacious enough that it could refer to withdrawal, it could refer to absence, it could refer to negative space, it could refer to the disembodied voice. Like there's a lot that disappearance can mean, but it's also provided kind of a red thread to start looking at the breadth of the career and letting some things be in and others be out, and the things that we're in to converse with one another. And then when we went about structuring the retrospective, I think there was a lot of pressure to do it chronologically for good, sound reasons, and particularly in New York, where we had this division between PS1 and MoMA simultaneously. It would have been very natural to put the early work in one spot and the mid and later work in another. But Kathy stuck to her guns and was adamant that that wasn't what she wanted to do. And wisely, I think we all kind of arrived at the structure of the loop, is what we kept calling it. There's so many loops in Bruce's work, looping as a technical structure, and also just this idea that concepts and formal traits in the work recur and might lie dormant for several decades and then recur in these surprising ways, which I think your exhibition makes really clear in certain ways. And so rather than structuring it chronologically, we did a lot of pairings between earlier work and later work and made sure that both shows sort of opened with such a pairing and that those kinds of pairings would persist. And we structured the accompanying catalog similarly, with rather than assigning certain authors early work and certain authors late work, we tried to come up with themes that needed treating, but that would sustain examples from early and middle and late, right, to sort of take people narratively through the same kind of looping structure that we were trying to create in physical space. And I think it made it more interesting for us, and I hope more interesting for the viewer, rather than just getting kind of a linear march. Right. And hopefully it was a little more true to Bruce's thinking and the way that he works than trying to impose a sort of artificial linearity when often the mind kind of ruminates and comes back rather than only moving in one direction.
Vicente, in your show, the way you structured it was really quite beautiful because of the luxury of space. You were able to see the corridors in very different ways that you would normally in a tight museum setting. But the thing that really struck me in spending time in the show was how experiential it was, obviously with the corridors. But then you walk out of the museum and there's this incredible, what felt almost like a beautiful mile-long walk.
Raw materials.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about
how
you designed that.
It ended up in a small room, anthroposocial. With the, So now, for us, the choreography is essential. We made so many tests. Before I ask an artist to do the show there, I already come with an imaginary checklist, and I imagine the show there. Then I work with images and tape on the floor. And when I think that works, then we even do with some poles and some tape volumes. And only when I think it works is when I approach the artist. So we have done that exercise, and I think it could work. But then also, once the artist accepted, then I don't know anything about computers, but we have a guy who makes these 3D views, and then we were going through there, and then we made some variations, because at the beginning there were too many, because this is like a film, It's a film, peripatetic film, a film that you walk inside. So the rhythm of the exhibition is essential. You have to feel there are twists and turns. You cannot feel. You have a feeling that that you are in a subway train passing from one car to another, or in a department store. So everything was carefully choreographed, and we made several changes along the way, but always the moment of truth is when you install it, because there's no amount of virtual reality is going to tell you it works. So and there is the moment of sudden death. There's nothing you can do it, because to install the show we were like 7 weeks, So I was very happy that for us it worked, And also I thought it would be a show with no audience, Right. We were very surprised that on Sundays we had 6,000 people. So to us it was completely a mystery and a miracle. But still, if you have been told 60 people, I don't care. I would have done it, because numbers, I don't believe in numbers. I'm not superstitious.
It's a true contemporary museum person talking. Well, this is a little bit of a shift, and maybe it's an unfair question, but it's so critical in terms of really following and understanding Bruce's work. But the role that technology plays, even from the early days. And Taylor, you did all that great research in the '60s on what was happening in Bruce's work. It's a broad question, but I'd love to hear from both of you a little bit about how Bruce uses technology and how it's evolved or not evolved, or changed and not changed as technologies and the capabilities of technology have shifted.
Well, I think it was a focus of my research to start thinking about all the ways in which Bruce has always been kind of an early adopter. And from the moment of the 60s when the work was beginning and was already taking such sort of branching form, these really emergent technologies that didn't necessarily have any fine art application or history, he wasn't afraid to try them. And I think that has lasted and has persisted, and takes us to the point where there are these sort of magically visually dazzling and effective 3D videos shot on iPhone, but that from the beginning there was a curiosity and an adaptiveness and a willingness to try new things, whether other artists were setting an example that way or not. So, he was, I think, truly the first established artist to try to make a hologram in the 60s when that technology was so new that there really were hardly any visual examples of it outside of a laboratory context. And I did research about how Bruce had applied to the art and technology program at LACMA, sort of, famed project that went on for 5 years, putting artists in with industry and giving them access to tools that they wouldn't have otherwise had. But his proposal was rejected because the curators thought, like, how could a hologram be visually interesting? Basically, it was a pretty rude rejection. And that he went ahead and did it anyway, and by himself figured out how to go to a lab at the University of Michigan where they were doing this and get them to take him seriously enough to try experimenting with some, and became the first artist to make holograms. LACMA be damned, which was impressive to think about, just like going through all the effort to try to pursue this technology that doesn't even want you, but you want it for whatever reason, and you're trying to figure it out. And then, he's making 3D images of himself in 1968 and 1969, and talk about lying dormant, right? Like, holography seems like it's such a blip. It's such a, like, Age of Aquarius technology that's kind of like preserved in amber and was never really a thing, the way that his experiments with video and film and sound in the 60s are now so prescient that these are all fields that we take totally seriously in a contemporary art context. But the 3D then does emerge fully 50 years later as a technology and a visual experience that is clearly compelling enough to keep pursuing in different ways.
Vicente?
Well, I am the least technological person. I don't know how to use a computer. I hardly know how to use my iPhone. So I'm really Jurassic, Paleolithic. So I'm not fetishist with technology, but I don't think Bruce is either. So I think looking at for example, the use of early film and then video, it had to do with performance. And so in his own words, he said in an interview that since nobody seemed interested in showing the performances, why not record it? In the past, the performances were just documented by through photograph, but you miss the time effect. So they are frozen, they don't make any sense. So in this case, I think what started as a documentation, like many times, then it became a work in itself. So in a way, let's say that it connected the sculpture with the performance, with the dance, with the choreography. In a way, it's the same way than the relation with Duchamp and Man Ray. Man Ray, he wanted to become a painter. And Duchamp said, okay, you want to make some money? Come and take some pictures of my works. And then at one point he said, okay, take a picture of the glass but with dust. Levate Poussière. Said, that's an artwork. We sign it. So then Duchamp discovered that photography could be an art. At the same time, you had Brancusi. Brancusi, he was doing sculptures, and then he was taking photographs of the sculpture in the studio and alone. It's what I called sculptural equivalents. They were other kinds of sculptures. They were expanding the field in a way, no? Then Man Ray arrived at the Museum of Natural History and did the objet mathématique, the scientific objects that there were just mathematical elements and became, again, sculptures through photography, sculptural equivalents. So I think, in a way, with Bruce, a little bit happened the same way. So something that arrived sometimes as a tool, it became then an essential element and a character, a main character. No? And also, but not, I think sometimes in a kind of, say, in a kind of low technology, no? Like surveillance cameras. They were not done for really for to have a good film, no? So, but why not? This question of why not is why don't incorporate that? Because with this we can transcend this image making.
Right.
I think that point that you made about not fetishistic is so important, right? Because if you talk about an artist that is open to technology and yet not showing off what it can do, right? Like not letting the technology overwhelm the idea, letting the technology always be in service of the idea, and with this kind of workman-like ethos toward whatever medium it is that is being pursued. When I was doing some research for my catalog essay for the MoMA show, I was thinking about much more recent video, but then going back to read remarks about the early video. And I read Bruce saying somewhere that those early tapes, those foundational, iconic black and white early tapes from 1968, were made during a summer where he was renting a studio on Long Island from another artist who had lent his space but had said, like, I don't want to know you were here, basically. Like, you can't make a mess, you can't spatter paint, you can't leave pinholes in my walls, like, leave no trace. And that a video recording is a way that you can make something without making a mess, right? And that Leo Castelli had this porta-pack for the artists at a time when porta-packs were just becoming available. They were not, like, affordable for individuals to have, but Castelli had one so it could be borrowed. And that Bruce and Keith Saunier and Richard Serra all in a row are, you know, artists in the Castelli stable that are borrowing this same camera to make some of these videos that are like that. When we think about the canon of what video art started and could be, it's all coming from this actually very humble source in these humble circumstances of, okay, I have like borrowed equipment in a rented room and what can I do with it? And it's hard to think of more kind of course of history changing 20th century artworks than some of those videos, but born out of necessity in certain ways, right? Like, just it's a solution to a problem.
Necessity being the mother of invention.
Exactly.
Yeah, great. Another sort of topic that we talked about discussing today was the significance of the body in Bruce's work throughout, and I'd love to hear from both of you on that, because that fundamentally that rides right through, and you can see that in this show, obviously.
Yeah. Well, body and mind, they go together. For many years, in the studio, I understand, a drawing called Make Me, Think Me. So I think that was a kind of mantra, no? Right. Where both have to be connected. And make me think make me. And in a way, both need to be exercised. As he was saying also, thinking alone is not enough. But also, acting, moving without thinking, also it doesn't work. It's like Michelangelo used to say, il disegno è una cosa mentale. Disegno in Italian means two things. It means drawing and design. So, yeah, you cannot draw without having. And diseño for the Neoplatonist, for Pico della Mirandola, it was segno de Dio, sign of God. So everything starts with the design, which is what connects the body and the mind. And then with the body, I think something that always interests me in art is when it provides me an unstable equilibrium. And what he started doing with the body. Because I think there is when you can really go into another dimension previously unknown.
That was a really interesting set of things to say. It makes me want to say something different than I would have otherwise in response to this question, because I think obviously Bruce has put his own body into the work in ways that are really profound and noticeable as a running thread through the course of the career, right up until this newest work that you have on display here. But then, of course, like, one of the major innovations, right, in the 1969, 1970 period is making our bodies perform, right? Like activating us, creating these situations where the body and the work need not only be his, it can also be ours in this way that, visual art experiences hadn't necessarily provoked prior to that. I love what you're saying about like destabilizing a little bit, that right? Like I feel like destabilization could also be the watchword for what happens in the best of Bruce's work from kind of start to finish. And I mean, the corridors are such a key example of how that happens. But I've also been thinking lately about probably a lesser known piece because it can't be in shows. It's site specific and outside. But there's this outdoor staircase that Bruce made for Oliver Ranch in Northern California. Is one of my favorite pieces, and I think it's just so eloquent in its simplicity and how it kind of takes you through this experience. But it's just a set of cement stairs down a hillside, and it follows the topography of the land. But this, it's such a basic assumption we don't even think about it, but stairs are supposed to be even, right? Like the rise on a set of steps. Some stairs are steeper, some stairs are more shallow, but they're consistent from step to step. And so whenever we encounter a new set of stairs in our life, we might pay attention for the first 3 or 4 steps until we get the sense of it. But then once our body understands how steep are these, how shallow are the risers, we can just walk without thinking about it. It becomes unconscious because we know how to navigate stairs. And what Bruce did with this staircase was, by following the topography of the land, each riser is different than the one before it and the one after, and the range is really extreme. So I think the shallowest of the steps is only a 1-inch rise, and the tallest is a 20-inch rise. And each one is different than the one that follows it. So there can be nothing rote or routine that kicks in with the way that you're navigating the space. And all you're doing is walking down a staircase, which we've all done countless times. And yet you have to pay close attention each and every time because it's always going to be a little different. There's no balance, there's no consistency or continuity. And it's a little bit like dangerous, but it drops you into yourself in this way that is very obvious. And I think, that's a purely physical experience in terms of navigating the world, but it says a lot also about less physical and more kind of psychological and affective experiences in the way that we locate ourselves and the way that we navigate the world around us, in the assumptions that we make about, like, I've done this before and I'll do it again the way I always did, like not in the presence of Bruce's work, right? And that like snapping you into your body by having an unusual physical experience can cause thinking to happen on different channels as well,
So the psychology of taking your body through a process, both, in terms of conceptually, but also physically. I mean, I remember the first time I participated with the Greene corridor. It was for someone who's claustrophobic. It was an incredibly challenging moment, and making your body so aware of itself, and what you described beautifully with the stairs at the Oliver Ranch. The corridors also play that sort of amazing role of that immediately you're aware at this hyper level of your own body, your own psychology, and dealing with these things as you approach them. But it was, and it didn't get easier the second time.
No.
He's not easy on you, right? Like
no, and he shouldn't be.
These physical experiences aren't welcoming. It's not like the soft armchair that Matisse talks about, right? It's something else.
Yeah. Well, and it's also the same psychology that I experienced when I first walked into clown torture. He takes you through the full spectrum of emotions, both the humor of it when you first walk in, and then all of a sudden, your body and your mind starts going through this psychology that's really makes you come out of that experience very differently. So
it made me dance.
Yeah.
It made me dance. Yeah, I said no.
I think it scared the hell out of me the first time, but I feel like if art doesn't do that every once in a while, then like, what are we all doing?
Yeah. These two last questions that I want to really have you talk about are, and I respectfully, Bruce, be patient with us with these questions, but I really would like to know how both of you would characterize Bruce's influence for later generations, because we're seeing now a second generation of artists that, and I think all of us know this when you talk to artists and you say, well, tell me some of the things that you look at and who you look at and what's been influential. And Bruce's name comes up over and over again, even with artists that it's not apparent in any shape or form.
Exactly.
So I'd love to hear from both of you on that.
I had the experience of, well, first there is a consensus. No? Artists with very different practices, but a young artist that I showed was obsessed with making drawings about the Divine Comedy. He said, I have to see your Bruce Nauman show. I said, really? I wouldn't connect. He came, and he was completely blown up. So, but I think I have a theory, and it's that there are some artists that open and close at the same time, like Picasso. Picasso opens and closes, and the followers are an academy. They are really a caricature. Yeah? They try to be virtuosos that end up breaking the piano. You know. Instead, there are some other artists like Duchamp that open up and never close. And I think that's the same case with Bruce. And then each artist has to find its own way. But they have the model, you know. It's models to be tested, not solutions. And once the model is tested, abandon it and find a new one, find a new challenge.
Taylor?
I would probably say a similar thing, but yeah, I think it's this example that Bruce's work would set for younger artists, that you don't kind of like earn your place in history by doing one recognizable thing so well that it's done to death. You earn your place by changing, right? That like that constant change and constant reinvention would actually be the defining trait of what makes art worth doing and what makes a career worth following, rather than consistency. Like, I think making inconsistency a virtue might be one of the major things that I mean, I had the same experience in having a show of Bruce's work up in New York in 2018-19. Every artist I talked to was coming and telling me what a fan they were, whether you would sort of intuit that from what they made or not. And yeah, I mean, just it's such a simple thing because we so take it for granted, and it's the way that all artists work now. But like, just this idea that like you didn't have to be any one thing. You don't have to be a sculptor or a painter or a media artist or a draftsman when you can follow all of those paths, and just let the ideas be the guiding force.
So, what makes Bruce Nauman contemporary?
Well, that he is posing problems, not looking for solutions. He's looking for trouble.
I felt really gratified and interested in the experience of mounting this show in recent years, and getting to spend physical time with the work with a contemporary audience of like young New Yorkers, and just seeing how people reacted. There was a freshness to the recent work, obviously, that was wonderful to see. That 50 years into an artist's career, the work that's freshly coming out of the studio is feeling like as warmly received and as worthy of interest as the work that's is part of the canon, is part of the 101 lecture, and always will be. So that makes someone contemporary, and it's a very high bar to achieve, like to keep up with the course of history and to keep sort of driving where art is going year after year and decade after decade. We have very few examples of such a thing, but it's very special when it occurs. But also I found that the historical work was contemporary for people too, in a way that isn't always the case, but I think is really special when it occurs. I mean, we showed the double steel cage piece at MoMA PS1. It's somewhere in the slide deck. Again, one of these punishingly narrow corridors that can be navigated if you have a physique like Bruce's was at the time, but is not comfortable for anybody to go through that. And it was 2018 when the show opened, middle of the Trump administration, and I had some audiences of students looking at the work with me and saying, this is really upsetting at a visceral level because it reminds me of like kids in cages at the border. Right. I was like, that is a really valid thing to say, like that. It's interesting that that's hitting you at such a gut level, and that current events are inflecting the way that you're looking at this historical piece of work. And it was similar with the Nick Wilder corridor that has the closed circuit video where your image is there, but it's not doing what you think it should be doing through a very simple trick, but a very effective one. And people were talking about like, well, what does that mean to have your image out there in these ways that feel distorted? And we're constantly giving away our images in these ways, and are we comfortable with that? How do we feel about the visibility that we have and don't have to the people that are near us proximately and that might be far away? But an image is all I am these days, right? And it's like, in a way, that's, as a historian, like, that's totally anachronistic way of thinking. I mean, these works from the 1970s are not about the internet. They're not about social media. They're not about Trump administration policies. But I think that, like, artworks always have two temporalities, right? They have the moment that they were made, and they have the moment that they're experienced. And if the work can still feel contemporary in the moment that it's experienced to contemporary eyes, that means there's something in it that, again, inexhaustible.
Bravo.